Hello, in this video we are going to look at rounding to significant figures. This can be quite a tricky thing to apply, but it is used within lots of different questions. In these first examples, we're going to look at rounding to 3 significant figures. Now, it's worth noting with significant figures that we start counting from the first non-zero value. So this is different to decimal places where we start counting after the decimal point. In significant figures, we can start counting as soon as we hit a non-zero value. So in part A, our first significant figure is that 5. It's a non-zero value. Our second significant figure is the 1, and our third significant figure is the 3. Now at this point, I always like to draw a line so I can see exactly where my 3 significant figures are. Now, to decide whether or not I'm going to round up, I look to the number to the right. So in this case, my number is a 4. Now, if that number to the right is less than 5, so 4, 3, 2, 1 or 0, I do not round up. So my number is going to stay as 5.13. Now, I don't need to add any extra zeros. Once I'm after the decimal point, I just stop at that third significant figure. In part B, I'm going to start counting from the 8. This is my first significant figure. Now, once I've started counting, any 0 after that point is significant. So 8 is the first significant figure, 0 is the second, and 1 is the third. So I'm going to now draw my line. Now this time when I look to the right, I can see that my number is 5 or bigger, it's a 9. So this tells me that I'm going to round my 1 up to a 2. So my 8 and my 0 stay the same, but the 1 actually rounds up to a 2. Once again, I do not need to include any zeros after this point. In these next examples, I'm going to round to 2 significant figures. Now you'll notice in part C that I've got some zeros at the beginning of my number. These are not significant, so they are not included when we start counting. So my first significant figure is going to be the 7, and my second significant figure is going to be the 4. Now, just like I did before, I'm going to look to the right. The number on the right is less than 5, so I'm not going to round up. Now, when I write my answer, I need to include those zeros that I had at the start of the number, the non-significant values, and then my 7, 4. I don't need to include any zeros after this point. In part D, I'm going to be able to start counting from the beginning. So 3 is non-zero and 5 is non-zero. They're my first and second significant figure. I'm now going to look to the right to decide if I'm going to round up or not. The number to the right is less than 5, so I'm not going to round up. Now, when we have numbers that are before the decimal point, I do need to fill in those gaps with zeros, because it doesn't make sense that 35,489.1 would round to 35. So all of the places up to the decimal point need to be filled with zeros. So in this case, it's the hundreds column, the tens column, and the units column now need to have zeros in them. We don't need to include any zeros after the decimal point, just up to where that decimal point would sit. Keep practicing, it's a really tricky skill.